Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us for the first issue briefing of the annual meeting of Global Future Councils. My name is Oliver Cann. I'm with the public engagement team here at the forum. Very delighted to be joined for this session, which is on growth in the Gulf, with by Axel Lehmann. Axel is the Group Chief Operating Officer, member of the Managing Board at UPS, long-time friend of the forum. We've worked together on several projects in the past, including global risks back in a previous life. The theme is economic growth and development here. We're talking about growth in the Gulf, but we'll also, I imagine, take a wider steer and look at the global economy. As you know, issue briefings are designed to be as interactive as possible, so please stick up your hand if you have any questions. We try to encourage as entertaining and lively debate as possible. We also have a very healthy audience online, so welcome to our audience watching on weforum.org and via Facebook. Hope you contribute questions too. Axel, let's get things started off. Where are we at with the global economy? Markets have been misforecasting key events during the year. It's pretty difficult to gauge whether we're going up or going down. What's your sense?
Yeah, actually, I think a lot of what the World Economic Forum is doing is somewhat coming together. We work, for example, together on the Global Risk Report, and one of the insights always was you can not only look to, from an economic perspective, or from a political, or from a societal, or from a geopolitical perspective, it's somewhat things are coming together. So when I look to the global economy, yes, you look at it from a pure economic perspective. You would say this year globally it's roughly 3% growth. Next year we'll see maybe that will go up to 3.3%, something like that. You see somewhat that the US has a certain uptick in economic growth. Europe is still lagging, we would say roughly on 1.5%. Japan is also somewhat a little bit sluggish. UK, for example, is doing surprisingly well against all the forecasts that we have seen so far when it came to the Brexit. So that is the pure, I will call it the economic perspective, but you overlay that with what is happening in particular also politically, midterm, what the Brexit is really meaning. We will see how that will turn out. We will see what the new incoming government in the US will really change and adjust. And what it shows clearly when you also look back a little bit is how the market were somewhat misinterpreting, for example, the UK sentiment in light of the UK Brexit vote, and the same apparently also happened with the US vote. So there's something ongoing in the society, geopolitically, that the markets have very, very hard time to read. And that is somewhat, the interdisciplinary perspective that we need to take when we are going to have, a look into the future.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And it draws on the whole question of the wisdom of experts misinterpreting data. Markets are supposed to be intuitive, and yet, as we saw with Brexit and to a degree with the US election, the markets were caught out. I'm sure we'll come to that in a second. But what about the highlights? So what are any kind of hotspots or encouraging signs and trends that you're seeing as part of a managing board of one of the world's major banks?
Well, I think, one of the highlights is that I think we need to believe as companies, as entrepreneurs, as business people into our own strengths. And, I think the whole notion of the fourth industrial revolution, technology, digitalization, there's a lot of upside there, I think, for the economy, but also for society. So I think there is probably one of the key driving forces on one hand. On the other hand, and that goes hand in hand with upside, there's also downside, is the whole question of, of impact on society, impact of labor that needs to be really discussed.
Do we have any questions from the floor at this stage? There's a lady there putting her hand up. Can we have a microphone over here, please?
Now, if we look the new changes in the world, like the elections, American elections, Brexit, as you mentioned, how it will reflect itself on the world economy, and especially what Donald Trump has mentioned in his elections about protectionist and so on. How do you see this reflect itself on the region and on the world economy as a whole?
I think we are somewhat at the crossroad. It's very difficult to see, and I can't, and I do not want to speculate what the incoming new presidency will bring. I think it's somewhat at the crossroads. You know, you see what has happened, somewhat the political backslash regarding globalization. All major, at least in the advanced economies, concern about migration. It's a huge topic, and then, you know, millions and billions of people that feel we are somewhat left out. That is the so-called political environment in which we are living. So it needs somewhat, you know, wise, I think, political decision makers, because on one hand, you know, nobody would dispute from an economic perspective that globalization, free trade is absolutely essential for global welfare. I think that is, you can't really dispute. On the other hand, you also cannot dispute that you know, economic logic cannot prevail political logic, and when millions and billions of people feel left behind, you need to find somewhat the middle ground. But one thing I think it will trigger, and that is for me a hope and a potential upside, when you look to, you know, how did we cope since the financial crisis, what in particular central bankers try to do at their job, and we all come to a point to realize that is definitely not enough. Deep policy changes are really required. So, you know, when you look to recent election results, you look to somewhat, you know, the limited, you know, continued impact that central bankers can have. Real policy changes are absolutely essential. In which direction it will go, we will all see that, you know, in Europe in the coming election. Next year will be a huge election year in most of the European economies. But then you see also the incoming US presidency will have an absolutely key impact on that.
Okay, so lady there, and then gentleman in the front row over here, please. If you could, madam, just remind us your name and where you're from for a benefit of our audience.
Ángeles Espinosa from the Spanish El País newspaper. We're talking about the Gulf region, and the real powerhouse here is Saudi Arabia. The Deputy Crown Prince has recently announced a very ambitious plan to reform the country, particularly the economy. I would like to know, from the perspective of the banks, what are your expectations for Saudi Arabia in terms of how this is going to affect the growth and the transformation of the kingdom?
And maybe we could, Axel, maybe we could widen that, and maybe if you have any views from your role as a senior banker on commodities and oil markets and energy, because that's key to the whole region as well. So perhaps Saudi Arabia, and specifically, if you have any insights, and I'd love to know your views on the commodity side of things.
Well, on the commodity side, obviously, you know, again, when you see somewhat the whole discussion globally around energy and commodity, that seems to go back a little bit to, you know, national autonomy. You see it clearly, you know, with in the U.S. election years. Apparently, the emerging program of the Trump administration will call for more, you know, energy autonomy. You see it also when it comes to question of alternative energy in for example, in European countries. So that seems to be one core trend. And the second one is obviously on energy. When you look on middle and longer term, that's directly linked also to, you know, global economic growth, and that will have then an impact obviously on that region here as well.
Thanks very much. I believe gentleman here on and then we'll go to the second row.
Yeah. Thanks. Frank Cann from the National newspaper, Abu Dhabi. You say that free trade is essential for global welfare, yet it's obvious that lots of people don't agree anymore. Certainly President-elect Trump doesn't agree, and increasingly in Europe, people don't agree either. And you also said that deep policy changes are required to address this. Well, we've just had these deep policy changes in the US, and we may see more in Europe and elsewhere in the world. But they don't agree on the fundamental aspect that free trade is essential. They don't believe in global free trade at all, it seems to me. So how do you square these things? You know, we've had the change, but they're going the wrong way as far as you're concerned.
Look, I think what I was referring to the policy changes is, you know, when you look after the financial crisis, in particular, economists were relying on the actions that central bankers have taken. You have seen, when I look, for example, to Europe, relatively little changes in labor law. You have seen relatively little changes, for example, in fiscal policy. And that is what also, I think, partly probably the US presidency, the new one, will bring, is addressing, you know, the whole question of fiscal policy that can create a huge new stimulus. On the global trade, you know, I was making reference to, yes, economically, logically, it's absolutely essential for economic welfare, and there's somewhat a conundrum. You know, we are all very, very happy to have, you know, the T-shirt that costs, you know, a handful of dollars that is produced not in the country I live in, the Western world, is produced, you know, somewhere in Bangladesh or so. I'm very, very happy to have my cell phone, my Apple, that is produced somewhere in the world, you know, designed in California. So when I would start as the US presidency, for example, to increase, you know, import taxes dramatically, on, for example, on Chinese goods, you know, taxes and Apple products will go even higher in the price even for US citizens, and that will not cope well. So I think there's somewhat, what I want to say is somewhat economic reality, but there is somewhat the education, and then certain, you know, certainly, you know, labor market and labor market reforms are absolutely necessary to address also part of the global challenges, and then also address the challenges that are coming with the fourth industrial revolution. Now, technology will completely change the way and what we do and the way we work. And this is, I think, one of the key challenges that from a political perspective needs also to be addressed.
Okay, I think we have, I'm just going to say here, because we don't want to miss the opening plenary, so we're going to have a hard stop at 10:02. So we've got 7 minutes of high quality questions. You, sir, and then lady in the front row.
Yeah, Siddesha from Gulf News. Now we have so many unknowns. Until a few weeks we didn't know that Trump would be the president. Until before Brexit we didn't know it would happen. How big corporations like yours are bracing for this unknown, especially given at a time when, you know, businesses don't like risk, this impending risk, either on the political side or on the economic side. And now we have the biggest challenge as far as the US Fed is concerned, because next month they're meeting and we don't know as in whether they're going to hike rates. Suddenly we have a drastic fall in expectations from only 80% now 56%. So how are a corporation like yours are bracing for this unknown? And secondly, this kind of growing fears in this large masses, is there, either in US or in Brexit case, is there any opportunities for corporations like yours or for smaller corporations?
You know, I think from a business perspective, the way we look at it is we do not speculate on any outcome, neither politically nor in another way. So we were neither speculating on the Brexit or speculating on, you know, potential policy action that the new administration will take. We started to build a business model that is, you know, that can cope with the various changes. We have you know, clear focus on customer and customer needs is absolutely essential. And then B, make sure when we do investments that we have some inbuilt flexibilities. So for example, you know, very tangible, we just opened, I think, big new office spaces in London, which is fantastic, but we contractually made sure that when we would be forced, for example, to move part of our resources out of London somewhere else, for example, into some of the continental European cities, we can do so without really having financial harm. So you think in scenarios and you build in some flexibility in your business model, but in environment like that, I mean, you know, to focus as strongly as possible on the customer and the customer needs is highly important. We are the world's largest wealth manager, so to give the advice to, you know, call it the millionaires and billionaires of that world or in the investment bank, it's absolutely essential. So advice, customer relationship, and know-how and insights is absolutely important, what we also try to share with our customers, but not, try to get ahead of the game and try to second guess what potential political or economic outcomes could be.
Let's take one last question. There's a microphone there.
Zaina Fatah from Bloomberg News. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. One, Trump been talking quite a bit about repealing the Dodd-Frank regulations in the US. So what's your view on that? And the second thing, what do you think a Trump presidency, or so far what you've heard from him, let's say since he was elected, do you think he will have a lot of impact, positive or negative for foreign banks working in the US like yours, or others who've been hit before by really, really heavy penalties? Some thought were unfair.
Well, actually, when you just look, share price development after the U.S. President, U.S. President Trump was announced, share price on financial institutions and banks went up. So there is a certain hope. And why is the hope there? Exactly due to the two reasons that you just gave. First, he claims, and he apparently intends to significantly give tax reliefs to corporations in particular, so help them to reinvest the money, which would be good for the economy. And secondly, he has voiced relatively clearly comments on regulation. And our point of view is we need strong and good regulation that is making sure we have somewhat a level playing field. So that is about capital strengths. Most large banks have, compared to pre-crisis level, have, I think, de-risked the balance sheet, increased capital level. So on average, it's 5 to 10 times higher the capital we have in the financial system to absorb, I think, the financial risk we have. So that should stay. On the other hand, do you really need 2.5 pages Dodd-Frank, which somewhat tries in a heavy, detailed way to regulate a lot of issues that might be, reviewed also under the aspect of costs. Every regulation has a certain amount of costs, and I think that's what should probably will and should happen. Hopefully in the US. We have seen, by the way, exactly the same in my home country, in Switzerland, where the Swiss government came up with a new policy regarding the financial center Switzerland, and one of the policy measures is really to take a balanced view on new regulation that should really go always under a cost-benefit analysis, so that you cannot just add and add of new regulation, which is a key, I think, issue for most industry, definitely for the financial services industry.
We're taking this in a fascinating direction on the future of banking, which I'd love to continue, but I do want to finish on time. Axel, one question from me, if I may. What one hope, expectation, outcome would you like to see achieved at the end of this conference? I know you're deep in deliberation mode in the council booths here for the next 2 days.
I think what I would like to see for the whole conference, and then also for the Global Future Council I'm co-chairing about the global financial and monetary systems, is a deeper understanding and a high-level roadmap on, how can we as leaders better reflect on the reality where the people are in the various nations, so the political, social environment, and then, impact on the economy, and what does this need from a global governance perspective, because I think we have a global governance crisis, or let's call it challenges that we need to address. So first of all, a deeper understanding of the issues, and secondly, lay out a high-level roadmap that then can be discussed further in Davos.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, as I said, time is marching on. Thank you so much, Axel, for joining us. Thank you for joining us in the room here. Thank you for those of you watching us live online at weforum.org. This session is now closed.